does ego, when you get so hands-on with these teams, in some ways hurt you or can hurt you or
Oh
hurt a
yeah.
franchise?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've had this conversation with other owners because you come in, you're successful at your business, and you think to yourself, "I'm smart. I'm good, right? I took this business and grew it to whatever that put me in a position to buy this team. So I'm going to stick with what works for me." And that's what got me in trouble with the NBA a lot when I first came in, because I'm like, I'm not going to change for them. This is what works. But that ego, to your point, also makes you overconfident to a certain extent. So you go do, like, I remember my first year, I bought three number one picks and in the 2000 draft, and it ended up being the worst draft in the history of the NBA.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, because you want to come in, I did anyways. I was young, I'm competitive, and I just wanted to come in and have an impact. And that approach, that ego, that competitiveness can work against you. Now you see, OKC, their special sauce was they were patient.
Yeah.
They didn't rush things. They didn't force it. Whereas I always tried to force it. And I think that my competitive nature worked against me too often.
Yeah. I don't want to even get into the trade. Everyone's talked about it ad nauseum. But the one thing that I think is hard for me to figure out, because I'm an avid sports fan and I've watched star players change teams. As a fan of the Knicks growing up, there were players that were traded that broke my heart, but never to this magnitude. Like, what was the emotional connection that, unless you were in Dallas, you wouldn't understand? And there was other parts to it, right? The way in which it kind of came out. But what was it that just hit Dallas fans so deeply?
Luka did things no other player had done. I mean, it was called Luka Magic for a reason, because there truly was magic, and he was such a good guy off the court that every interaction that I've ever had with him was positive. When he would interact with fans, the things he did in the community, and you combine those two together, it was a unique situation. And particularly, after Dirk spending 21 years here, I think everybody just anticipated that Luka would be here forever. And when that didn't happen, I mean, it hurt a lot of us. And so I think it really came down to, he was not just a special player, but it was how he was special. Just the moments he created, last second falling out of bounds, against the Knicks, miss the free throw, get the putback to send us to overtime or whatever it was, and then do a little dance.
Yeah.
That's, you don't see that from other players ever.
Yeah, I guess, and there's certain people, it's like an intangible. It's an it factor. It connects with
Yeah,
people.
for
And
sure. There's certain people, they were just made for the moment. We saw that a lot with Dirk, but Dirk wasn't the one bringing the ball up. Dirk had to get into a spot or take the ball to a spot. Luka had the ball in his hands all the time, probably more than any player in the NBA. And so we saw a lot more of the magic. And I think that created a special bond with fans and his teammates. And, no, I didn't anticipate, nobody anticipated what happened would happen. And so I think that made it a little bit tougher.
yeah, the shock factor for sure. Do you think there's like God gave Dallas a bit of a mulligan potentially with Cooper Flagg? It felt like that. Like it felt like that Patrick Ewing coming to the Knicks in '85. Just something that obviously like wasn't planned, but if I'm a Dallas fan, I could sleep a little bit better at night potentially.
For sure. I mean, all fans really want is hope. The hope that we're going to be a good team, the hope that, something special could be put together. And, the basketball gods smiled upon us when we got Cooper. And the kid's just amazing. Everything, I've met him, talked to him, deal with the people around him. Everybody just loves him to death. And, the best part is he's all basketball and a little bit of golf.
Yeah.
And that's all he cares about. He's not doing anything. He's just all about basketball. And he's 18 years old. My middle daughter is going away to college, and she's a few months older than him.
Crazy.
And it's just stunning.
I know it's hard to like fully comprehend the age of these guys, because when you watch them on TV, you like instantly age them in your mind a bit, right?
Because it's hard to comprehend that this 18-year-old is the hope of a franchise, just like when we got Luka, the hope of a franchise. And it's just, and he's been through that pressure before. And, at Duke, that's obviously a hotbed, and he was highly recruited and the top recruit. And, it took him a little bit to feel his way in, but he did. And he'll do the same thing with the Mavs.
Yeah, it's funny because even the way people talk about LeBron as ancient, in our world, like he's a young guy. Like he's a
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I would always tell people, basketball is one thing, but Father Time is undefeated. But life after basketball is a long, long, long time.
Yeah.
And so, we've learned to adapt as we've gotten older. But like you said, a player being 40, 41, that's young. That's how old I was when I bought the Mavs. That's like being a teenager in this business.
I know. What do you think Dirk's legacy ends up being, 20, 40 years from now? And as somebody that was so close to him, do you think Dirk is not fully appreciated for what he did on the court? Or do you think that he's pretty acknowledged for like how great he was?
I think while he was playing, he was acknowledged because he was hitting all these milestones. The championship, 20,000 points, 30,000 points, the number of all-star game appearances. And so when he was playing, people truly appreciated him. Now he's appreciated in Dallas because of all the things he does in the community. And, true Mavs fans, remember and love him and see the statue in front of the arena. But outside of Dallas, I don't, it's almost as if, younger fans today don't really understand the impact he had on the game. His ability to come in and change a game, his ability to shoot and score and rebound and do all the things that he needed to do to win. 10 straight years of 50 plus wins. I mean, that's unheard of in this day and age. And yet, kids, unless you're in a highlight film or unless you're in, on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube videos, you're not truly appreciated any longer. And that's just not Dirk. That's, Patrick Ewing, guys we all really, truly loved and appreciated as players. It's just harder for players to really sustain that after they're done with their careers.
I love that Patrick Ewing's been mentioned twice in this interview already.
I know, right?
That's incredible. But it's true because it's like, I always have this conversation about these like prototypes of players that are created and like when a prototype is innovated. So it's like Kobe obviously was absolutely godlike, but it was in the mold and the prototype of MJ. And even LeBron, to some regard, we've never seen anything like it, but it was in the mold of Magic. Kevin gets a lot of credit for this 6'10" perimeter player that could move and handle the ball. But I would say that Kevin would acknowledge that Dirk was a bit of an inspiration in terms of that ability to play that way. And in a lot of ways, he was the first of that prototype.
Oh, yeah, because I remember when KD came into the league with the Sonics, right? Just trying to find his way, super skinny, right? And just moving his game further and further away. And KD had better handles than Dirk, but just in terms of being able to shoot, KD kept on working and has become a phenomenal shooter, particularly in the mid-range right now. But what's really different now, like I have a 15, about to turn 16-year-old son, and their skill level is 1,000 times greater than players 10, 15 years ago, and certainly longer, because all day long they're watching videos of their favorite players. And so you see them replicating Steph. You see the handles and all the same moves and the little still should be a travel step back, step back, step back three, things that kids are doing today. And so if they're not emulating a player, they're not really connecting to the player.
Yeah.
And as a result, I see it at Mavs games. When LeBron comes to town, huge number of LeBron fans sell out. Steph comes to town, huge number of Steph fans sell out. Now more and more Luka, same type of thing, and hopefully Cooper. But unless the young players are emulating you, you don't have as much reverence, maybe is the word, because they're not watching you in videos, all day, every day.
Yeah. No, it's the same reason why like big men historically couldn't sell shoes and like why someone like Kyrie had such a like incredible sneaker business, because it's like you're watching a wizard and you want to try to emulate that.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. Player after player today will tell you Kyrie has got the best handles, the best moves, the most stuff to him, right? And Kyrie will go with it and live up to it as well. And then, Kyrie has also started to understand the beauty of social media and the downside, but
Yeah.
more so, you know, understanding how to connect to fans. He talks about his community all the time. Hell of this, hell of that. And he builds that into his shoes, and he builds that into, how how he relates to fans. And I think that's really special and part of what really has changed with fandom, just because social media is relatively new.
Yeah. When I talk about the Brooklyn era, right? So, I'm a diehard Knicks fan that wanted Kevin to play for the Knicks. He chose the Nets. Him and Kyrie had a vision. And then I had to emotionally get on board with the Nets. So, like, this lifetime Knicks fan in me had to
That's tough.
completely, it
Yeah,
was
that's tough.
tough. And I did it. And I always talk
No, you
about,
didn't. You just pretended
I
that you did.
pretended, I pretended, I pretended. I had better seats at the Barclays. So, yeah, I was locked
Yeah,
in.
that helps.
But it feels like, as an owner, if you can relate in some ways to what Joe went through in that time, and I was fully enmeshed in it. But when I've come out of it now, I feel like none of that would have unfolded that way had it not been for the period of time this COVID time where
Oh, for sure.
you just let people express what they wanted, and and Joe did the right thing at that time in getting them what they wanted. But in today's day now, you would get in a room and figure this out. I'm sure you would have gotten in a room and figured that out.
Yeah, COVID obviously was a wild card because it was a life or death thing for so many people. Because with the Mavs, we had to go through the thinking of, okay, what percentage of our fans coming to the game were immunocompromised or cancer survivors, and were we just going to preclude them and say, hey, just don't come, it's on you? Or were we going to try to take precautions? And what if, who knows on what variant? There were so many different variables that I always wanted to err on the side of caution. The concept that somebody might die on my watch because of something I did for the Mavs games was just scary as hell to me. Combine that with what Kyrie and his positioning, that was just oil and vinegar. So I felt bad for Joe and felt bad for Kyrie. But once we got past that, Kyrie, has evolved, and Kyrie has matured in a lot of ways. And, he's a, I wouldn't say different person, but you grow up. There's a difference between being 20 years old coming into the league, 25, and 30, and 33 for that matter. You do mature, and you get a family. In Kyrie's case, you have kids. That changes how you think.
Yeah, I think people don't tend to understand that, like, the same natural evolutions that we all go through, like the things I thought and felt at 24 were not the same at 28 and 32, and
Yeah.
it's tough. What do you think about, like, I'm like very excited to hear all about NBA Europe potentially. I mean, I think the value of these brands, if this is what happens, PSG, Real Madrid, like, you don't get an opportunity to turn a switch and have a fan base that's so ravenous be like, listen, this is your basketball team in market now. Are you bullish on what NBA Europe could be as well?
Depends how we do it, right? It depends how they do it.
Yeah.
Do they work with the Real Madrids and kind of become part of them and supportive? Or do we say we're creating a whole new league and you're either in or out, and we'll compete with what's going on now with EuroLeague, Eurocup, etc.? That's going to be tough because, as like you talked about football, and their football, the teams are the same. Real Madrid soccer and Real Madrid basketball are part of the same club. It's
Yeah.
just a whole different beast. And, you're going to have to ask them to upgrade facilities and spend a lot of money, or we spend a lot of money. So I understand the goal, because it doesn't make sense now for the NBA to expand. As much as, 2 years ago, we talked about it being like an accepted path. I think now, because the revenue from the TV deal is so high, you don't want to share it. There's no amount of expansion fee that makes that make sense. And as you know, as an agent, if we add two more teams, that changes the cap calculations, right? So the basketball related income times 0.51 divided by 32 instead of 30 means the cap is going down.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any way that that gets approved. And so you look at Europe, and I was always a fan of the NBA taking the soccer approach to the Olympics, meaning, 23 and under or whatever it is for soccer players to participate in the Olympics. That's exactly what we should do in the NBA, and we should create our own World Cup. To me, a World Cup every 2 years, that's the dominant competition in the basketball world, would be far more valuable. But every time I brought that up to Adam or David Stern, they said, well, our deal with FIBA doesn't preclude it. And then all of a sudden they renew their deal with FIBA without talking to the owners about it. And so there's no chance. And so I think it's riskier to try to build your own league in Europe, as opposed to trying to build a super event that already has an analogous event in the Soccer World Cup.
Yeah, that's actually funny you say that, because I found out that the U.S. Open generates, like, the U.S. Open tennis tournament generates like somewhere close to $500 million a year, right? And with like 200+ million in cash flow. And then I was thinking about the idea that, like, if you were running Live Golf, for instance, which you wouldn't have, that's a totally like far left thing, but like, they probably would have been better off, because scarcity right now has so much value, right? This, like, all this build up to a moment. If Live Golf had just created an event that was working adjacent to the PGA, probably would have been just way more successful, without question.
Well, I agree. I mean, because when you have a league, people think, well, we have these great, well-known players, and so everybody's going to show up for the league. That's just not the way it works. I mean, you can look at the big three. They've done a great job surviving and growing their league, but just having players that were all-stars previously doesn't mean they're going to be, attractive for an ongoing schedule, and so the idea of bringing those same players to compete in one winner take all, that to me is exciting.